The conference room erupted in applause as my boss clicked to the final slide. My slide. The one I'd designed at 3 in the morning after running the numbers for the 5th time that week. The slide that had taken me 2 months to perfect, with data I'd personally verified through calls with 6 different departments. He smiled like he'd just won an award. Like he'd earned something meaningful and important. "I led this project from day one," he said. His voice smooth and confident, carrying across the room with practiced ease. "It took vision and dedication, but we pulled it off. This is what great leadership looks like." I sat in the back row, clapping along with everyone else. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them moving in rhythm with the others. I didn't want anyone to notice the anger building in my chest like pressure behind a dam. I kept my face neutral, pleasant even. Professional. The executives nodded at him with approval. One of them leaned forward and said something about excellent leadership and strategic thinking. Another mentioned a possible promotion, speaking loud enough that several people heard. The words felt like tiny knives. Not once did he look at me during the entire presentation. Not once did he say my name. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a steel band around my ribs and pulled hard. But I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. I'd learned something important over my years in this company. Anger clouds judgment. It makes you reactive, sloppy, emotional. Information, on the other hand, could be filed away, organized, and used later with precision. That's when I realized what was really happening in that room, what this presentation actually meant. He wasn't just taking credit for my work. He was systematically erasing me from the narrative entirely. I forced myself to smile even though my jaw ached from the effort of holding the expression. My face felt like a mask I'd glued on too tight. Around me, people congratulated him enthusiastically. They shook his hand with genuine warmth. They talked about how impressive the presentation was, how thorough the research seemed, how smart and innovative the strategy looked. One person even said it was the best client pitch they'd seen in years. Every single word felt like a small, precise cut across my skin. I wanted to stand up right then and tell them the truth. I wanted to show them the emails sitting in my inbox, the late-night texts I'd sent asking for clarification on data points, the revision notes with my name printed all over them in digital ink. I wanted to pull up my laptop and project every piece of evidence onto the screen behind him. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. Instead, I opened my notebook slowly and wrote a single word in careful letters along the margin. Document. Because I knew something he didn't understand yet. I knew that the truth doesn't need volume to be powerful. It doesn't need shouting or drama or confrontation. Just needs proof. Clear, undeniable, timestamp proof. He was still talking at the front of the room, still soaking in the praise like sunlight. His voice carried across the space like he owned every inch of it, like he'd built the walls himself with his bare hands. Someone in the front row asked him a technical question about the client model architecture. He paused for just a second too long before answering, his smile faltering almost imperceptibly. His explanation was vague when it came surface level, the kind of answer someone gives when they've memorized talking points but don't actually understand the mechanics underneath. I noticed the hesitation immediately. So did one of the executives, judging by the slight frown that crossed her face before she smoothed it away. He recovered quickly, laughing it off and redirecting the conversation to another topic he felt more comfortable with. But I saw the crack forming in his confident facade. And cracks, I knew from experience, always spread eventually. The title slide was still glowing behind him on the massive screen, projected in sharp blue and white corporate colors. It read in bold letters, Strategic Client Growth Initiative, led by Managing Director, Operations Division. I read it 3 times, searching for my name somewhere in the smaller text. Anywhere. My name wasn't listed as a contributor, not as a team member, not as a consultant, not even buried in the acknowledgement section that he'd clearly added at the last minute to thank the dedicated support staff who helped make this possible. Support staff. Those 2 words made my stomach turn. I'd built the entire client model from scratch, starting with nothing but a vague brief and a tight deadline. I'd rewritten the implementation timeline when the original plan fell apart during week 3 and everyone else had gone home for the night. I'd saved the launch personally when the data didn't match up at 2 in the morning and the client was expecting results by 9. I wasn't supportive. I was the architect. I was the foundation this entire project was built on. But he'd taken the blueprint I'd drawn with my own hands and signed his name across the bottom like it had always belonged to him. This wasn't an accidental oversight. This wasn't him forgetting to add my name in the rush to finish the final presentation slides. This was calculated, deliberate, planned. He'd thought about this, made a conscious decision. He decided that my work was worth more to his career than my recognition, that my contribution could be absorbed into his narrative without consequence. I closed my notebook carefully and tucked it under my arm, pressing it against my side. The meeting was wrapping up around me. People were starting to gather their laptops and phones, shuffling papers, standing up and stretching. I stood and walked toward the door, keeping my expression completely neutral, pleasant even. No one stopped me on my way out. No one even looked in my direction. I was invisible, exactly as he'd intended. As people filed out slowly, one of the senior executives clapped him on the shoulder with genuine affection. "Incredible leadership," she said warmly. "You really pulled the team together on this one. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need moving forward." He laughed, modest and easy, like humility came naturally to him. I had a great team supporting me through the whole process. Couldn't have done it without them. A team he never actually named out loud. A team he never acknowledged beyond that single, hollow, meaningless sentence that sounded generous but said absolutely nothing. My fingers tightened around my notebook until the edges bit into my palm, leaving small indentations in my skin. But I didn't let go. The pressure felt grounding somehow, real. I stood near the door and watched him bask in it all. Watched him accept congratulations for work he didn't do, hadn't conceptualized, couldn't explain in depth. Watched him shake hands and make confident promises about what came next, about future phases and expanded partnerships. He looked so comfortable in that moment. I'm entitled, so certain. Like this was exactly how things were supposed to go, how they'd always gone, how they'd always continue to go. I left the room quietly, my footsteps silent on the carpet, and walked back to my desk through the main office corridor. The office was still buzzing with residual energy from the presentation. People were talking in small clusters near the coffee station, pointing at their screens, discussing next steps and implications, speculating about budgets and timelines. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder in my documents. I named it simply Evidence. Then I began the methodical process of forwarding myself every email, every message thread, every piece of feedback that proved concretely what I'd actually done and contributed. Receipts don't shout at people or demand immediate attention. They just wait patiently, organized and ready. And when the right moment comes, they speak louder than anything else possibly could. My name is Lauren Whitmore, and I want you to understand exactly who I am. I'm 32 years old, and I've worked at this company for 6 full years. I started fresh out of graduate school as a junior analyst and worked my way up systematically to senior project lead through long hours, careful strategic planning, and results that consistently spoke for themselves. I'm not the loudest person in any room. I don't make grand speeches at company meetings or demand attention through bold gestures. I don't send celebratory company-wide emails every time something goes well. I just do the work that needs doing. I do it carefully and well. And for a long time I believed that it would be enough. That competence and dedication would naturally lead to recognition and advancement. For years it actually was enough. I got promotions on schedule. I got raises that reflected my contributions. I got assigned to bigger projects with more responsibility and higher stakes. My managers seemed pleased with my performance. My colleagues respected my opinions. But somewhere along the way, probably without me even noticing when it started, doing good work stopped being sufficient. Because the person positioned above me in the hierarchy realized something I hadn't considered. He figured out that he could take what I built with my own hands and present it as his own creation. He could absorb my ideas, my analysis, my strategic thinking, and rebrand it all under his name. And apparently, no one in leadership thought to question that narrative. I wasn't flashy or political. I wasn't loud or self-promoting. I didn't send updates to executives about every small win or milestone. I was simply effective at what I did. And that effectiveness, I was starting to understand with growing clarity, had made me functionally invisible to the people who mattered most. People saw the impressive results. They praised the outcomes. They valued the deliverables. They just didn't see me standing behind all of it. He'd figured that pattern out long before I did. And he'd used that knowledge deliberately and strategically. 3 months earlier, before any of this began, he'd leaned casually against my doorway with his arms crossed and a smile that seemed genuinely friendly at the time. "This project could make careers," he'd said, nodding toward the new client brief that had just landed on my desk that morning. Real careers. The kind that changed trajectories. I'd looked up from my screen, interested and engaged. "It's definitely a significant opportunity." "Huge," he'd agreed enthusiastically. "High visibility with the board. Direct executive attention. If we nail this execution, it changes everything for both of us." I'd asked, wanting to clarify the structure. He'd shrugged in that easy way he had. "You'll lead the actual build and development. I'll handle the stakeholder management and executive relationships. Real partnership. 50-50. Sounded reasonable at the time. Sounded fair and collaborative. I didn't realize then that handling stakeholders actually meant positioning himself as the singular face of the work while I stayed buried deep in spreadsheets and strategy decks that no one else would see. I didn't understand that partnership meant I would do all the actual thinking and analysis while he would do all the visible talking and presenting. I didn't grasp that making careers specifically meant his career, not mine. Not ours. Just his. I'd nodded and said, "Let's do it. I'm in." And I truly meant those words. I'd thrown myself completely into the project with everything I had to give. I worked late into the night. I skipped lunches to stay focused. I refined and revised and perfected every element until the model was absolutely flawless. He was right about one thing looking back. Made a career. Just not the way I thought it would. Not the way he'd implied. I remembered the late nights so clearly. Sitting at my desk with cold pasta from the cafeteria. The office dark and silent around me. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. I remembered catching mistakes no one else had noticed. Small inconsistencies in the data that would have caused major problems down the line. I remembered the client emailing me directly, asking questions, requesting updates, thanking me for the clarity I'd provided. That detail, those direct emails, mattered more than I realized at the time. Because while he was out networking and taking credit in meetings, I was the one actually talking to the client. I was the one they trusted. I was the one who understood their needs. He'd never even met them in person. But when it came time to present the final results, he made sure his name was front and center. He positioned himself as the visionary, the leader, the strategist, and I became the person who helped put it together. I didn't argue then. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself the work spoke for itself. I was wrong. Work doesn't speak. People do. And he spoke louder. After the meeting ended, he found me near the elevators. "Hey," he said casually, like nothing had happened. "Good presentation, right?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. His expression was relaxed. Confident. He wasn't worried. He wasn't guilty. He sincerely believed this was fine. "You know how these things go," he continued, pressing the button for the elevator. "Leadership wants a clear narrative. One face. It's just easier that way." Easier. Like erasing my contribution was a matter of convenience. "Right," I said. My voice came out steady. Inside something shifted. Something settled into place. He smiled, relieved. "Glad you get it. We'll do great things together." The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. I stayed where I was. "See you tomorrow," he called as the doors slid shut. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed metal doors. Then I turned and walked back to my desk. I had work to do. Not the kind he'd expect. The kind that would matter. That night I stayed late again. But this time I wasn't working on a project. I was protecting one. I opened my email and started forwarding everything to my personal account. Every thread. Every update. Every piece of feedback. The client's thank you notes that said, "Lauren, this is exactly what we needed." The revision requests that came directly to me, not him. The timeline I'd rebuilt when the original plan collapsed. I saved it all. Organized it. Dated it. I didn't know exactly when I'd need it. But I knew I would. Receipts don't shout. They don't demand attention. They just wait, quiet and patient, until the moment they're needed. And then they speak louder than anything else. I worked until midnight, methodical and thorough. Every email. Every document. Every proof point that showed what I'd actually done. When I finally closed my laptop, I felt different. Not angry. Not bitter. Down. Clear. Ready. Because I'd learned something important that day. Credit isn't given. It's taken. But proof can take it back. 2 weeks later, the client requested follow-up call. They wanted to discuss the next phase of the project. Expansion. Implementation. Bigger budget. He scheduled the meeting immediately and sent me a calendar invite with a note. "Join for support." Support. I accepted without comment. The morning of the call, I watched him rehearse in the conference room. He stood in front of the screen, practicing his talking points, checking his reflection in the glass. He was reciting my explanations, word for word. The analysis I'd written. The strategy I'd developed. He'd memorized it all, but he didn't understand it. Not really. I could tell by the way he stumbled over the technical sections. By the way he glossed over details that mattered. He noticed me watching and smiled. "Want to do a quick run-through before they join?" "I'm good," I said. He shrugged and went back to his notes. I sat down and opened my laptop. I changed one thing in the presentation deck. Just one. A small detail he wouldn't notice until it was too late. And by then it wouldn't matter. The call started exactly on time. The client's team joined. 4 people, including their director of operations, who'd been my main point of contact throughout the project. He jumped in immediately, confident and smooth. "Thanks for making the time," he said. "We're excited to walk you through the next phase." He clicked to the first slide and started talking. For the first few minutes it went fine. He hit the key points. He sounded competent. But then they asked a technical question. He paused. Just a second too long. "That's a great question," he said, stalling. "Let me pull up the relevant data." He fumbled with the slides, looking for something that wasn't there. I stayed quiet. The director of operations waited, patient but clearly noticing the delay. Finally, he recovered and gave a vague answer. Something about optimizing workflows and strategic alignment. Sounded good. But it didn't actually answer the question. The director frowned slightly. "Lauren, can you clarify the timeline on implementation?" I unmuted. "Of course," I said. Precise. Clear. I walked them through it step by step. Phases. The dependencies. The risk mitigation. They listened. As follow-ups. I answered each one. He sat back in his chair, silent. The dynamic shifted after that. Questions that had been directed at him started coming to me instead. "Lauren, how did you account for scalability?" "Lauren, what's the backup plan if the vendor timeline slips?" "Lauren, can you walk us through the cost projections again?" I answered every one. No hesitation. No uncertainty. 'Cause I'd built this. I knew it inside and out. He tried to jump back in a few times, adding commentary that didn't add value. The client listened politely, then redirected back to me. It wasn't intentional on their part. It was just natural. They trusted the person who clearly knew the answers. By the end of the call, he'd barely spoken for the last 20 minutes. When we signed off, the room was quiet. He closed his laptop slowly. "They just like you," he said finally, forcing a laugh. "You've got a good relationship with them." I didn't respond. He stood and left the room without another word. I sat there for a moment, staring at the blank screen. The crack I'd noticed before. It was spreading. Over the next 2 weeks, he doubled down. He sent emails to leadership highlighting his success with the client. He scheduled meetings to discuss his strategy for the next phase. He stopped including me in client communications entirely. I didn't push back. I didn't complain. I just kept doing my work. Kept responding when the client reached out directly. Kept building the foundation he was trying to claim. Arrogance, I was learning, has a way of speeding things up. The more confident he became, the more careless he got. He made promises he couldn't keep. Set timelines that didn't make sense. Committed to deliverables without understanding what they required. And I let him. Because I knew something he didn't. Overconfidence doesn't just lead to mistakes. It leads to exposure. And exposure was exactly what I needed. 3 weeks after the first follow-up call, the client launched a new phase. Bigger scope. Bigger budget. Higher stakes. He insisted on leading it alone. "I've got this," he told leadership in a strategy meeting I wasn't invited to. "I'll handle the client relationship personally." I heard about it later from a colleague who thought I should know. I thanked her and went back to my desk. I wasn't worried. Because I knew exactly what he was about to do. He was going to promise something he couldn't deliver. And he was going to do it with a timeline that only worked if you understood the system inside and out. Which he didn't. Which I did. So I waited. Kept my head down. I answered emails when the client sent them. I stayed accessible and reliable. And I let the clock start ticking. He committed to a delivery timeline that was impossible. Not impossible for me. I could have done it. But impossible for someone who didn't know how the back-end systems worked. Someone who hadn't built the original model. Someone who was relying on surface-level knowledge and confidence. The client accepted the timeline. They seemed pleased. Leadership approved the plan. He looked like a hero. For about 3 days. Then the work actually started. And he realized it was over his head. I watched it happen in real time. Watched him scramble. Watched him try to delegate tasks he didn't understand to people who were already overloaded. Watched him send confusing instructions that contradicted themselves. He didn't ask me for help. I didn't offer. The deadline loomed closer. And the cracks turned into fissures. 3 days before the deadline, my inbox pinged. An email from the client. Direct to me. Subject line. Implementation lead. Opened it. "Hi Lauren. We've been reviewing the project scope and timeline. Given the complexity and your deep understanding of the systems, we'd like you to lead the implementation phase directly. Please let us know if this works on your end. Best, Catherine." Catherine. The Director of Operations. I read the email twice. No explanation. No apology for going around him. Just a clear, direct request. I sat back in my chair. This was it. The moment everything shifted. I didn't reply immediately. I waited an hour. Let it sit. Then I wrote back. "Hi Catherine. I'd be happy to lead implementation. Let me coordinate with my team and confirm capacity. I'll follow up by the end of the day. Best, Lauren." Professional. No drama. I hit send. Then I waited for the explosion. It came 20 minutes later. My phone rang. His name on the screen. "Can you come to my office? Now." I walked down the hall. Knocked once. Entered. He was standing behind his desk, arms crossed. His face was tight. "What did you say to them?" he demanded. I blinked. "To whom?" "The client. Catherine just emailed me saying they want you to lead implementation." "What did you tell her?" I met his eyes. "Nothing. Nothing." His voice rose slightly. "She just randomly decided to reassign the project lead?" "I don't know what she's thinking," I said. Steady. Truthful. "She emailed me directly. I told her I'd check capacity and follow up. He stared at me like he was trying to find the lie. There wasn't one. I hadn't said anything to Catherine. I hadn't lobbied. I hadn't undermined him. Just done my job. Answered questions. Been available. And the client had noticed. This doesn't look good, he said finally. It looks like you went behind my back. I didn't, I said simply. He exhaled sharply. We need to fix this. Fix what? The optics. The reporting structure. We can't have the client thinking you're running this. I stayed quiet. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about himself. 2 days later, leadership called a meeting. The client wanted to join. I sat in the same conference room where this had all started. Chair. Different energy. He sat at the head of the table, trying to look calm. But I could see the tension in his shoulders. The video call connected. Catherine's face appeared on screen, along with 2 other executives from their side. Thanks for making time, Catherine said. Her tone was professional but firm. We wanted to discuss the project leadership structure moving forward. One of our senior executives nodded. Of course. We're committed to making this a success. Catherine didn't waste time. We've reviewed the progress so far, and we've identified some concerns. The timelines aren't aligning with the technical requirements, and we're not seeing the level of detailed oversight we expected. A pause. Frankly, we trust Lauren's work. We've worked with her directly throughout this process, and she's consistently delivered clarity and results. We're not comfortable proceeding without her in the lead role. The room went silent. I felt every eye turn toward me. I kept my expression neutral. Didn't smile. Didn't react. Just waited. One of our executives cleared her throat. Lauren, she said carefully, did you lead the original project development? It was a simple question. But the answer mattered. I could have been deflected. Could have softened it. Could have said we worked on it together and let him save face. But I didn't. Yes, I said. Just that. One word. No processing. No justification. Just the truth. The executive's eyes flickered to him, then back to me. And the client model. The timeline restructure. Yes. Another pause. Catherine spoke up from the screen. Lauren has been our primary contact since day one. Every technical question, every strategic decision. She's been the one we've relied on. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket. He tried to interrupt. I think there's been some miscommunication. But Catherine kept talking. We're not interested in miscommunication. We're interested in results. And Lauren delivers them. He opened his mouth, closed it. He had nothing to say. Because the truth was undeniable. He tried to recover. Started talking about vision and leadership and team coordination. But he stumbled over his own words. Contradicted things he'd said in earlier emails. Referenced documents he clearly hadn't read closely. I watched it happen in real time. Watched confidence turn into desperation. Watched arrogance turn into evidence. Because the more he talked, the clearer it became that he didn't actually understand the work. He'd memorized talking points. He'd learned the surface. But he didn't know the foundation. Didn't know the details that made everything work. And everyone in that room could tell. One of the executives asked him a direct technical question. He froze. Looked at me. I didn't help. The silence stretched too long. I'd have to pull the documentation, he said finally. Lauren, the executive asked. Answered. Clearly. Completely. The difference was obvious. And there was no coming back from it. Leadership paused the meeting. Asked the client to give them 15 minutes. Catherine agreed. The screen went dark. The executives turned to each other. Spoke in low voices. I sat still. Didn't move. Didn't try to listen. He stood abruptly and left the room. 10 minutes later they called us both back in. The client reconnected. One of the senior executives spoke first. After discussion, we've decided to restructure the project leadership effective immediately. Lauren will serve as the primary lead moving forward. Catherine smiled. That works for us. The executive continued. We'll also be reviewing internal reporting structures to ensure this kind of miscommunication doesn't happen again. Miscommunication. That was the polite word for it. His face had gone gray. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. When the call ended, I stood and gathered my things. No one said anything to me. No one had to. The decision had been made. And it was final. 3 days later, the client reached out to me directly. Not through the company. Not through leadership. Through my personal email. The message was brief. Lauren, we've been impressed with your work and your professionalism throughout this engagement. We'd like to discuss a potential opportunity with our organization, a role that reflects the value you bring. Would you be open to a conversation? Best, Catherine. I stared at the email for a long time. Role, title, recognition, everything I'd worked for offered directly. They weren't asking me to stay loyal to a company that had let someone else take credit for my work. They were asking me to join a team that actually valued what I did. I didn't respond right away. Thought about it, carefully. Considered what staying would mean. Considered what leaving would look like. And then I replied, Hi, Catherine. I'd be very interested in having that conversation. When does it work for you? Best, Lauren. I hit send. And something inside me finally relaxed. I gave notice 2 weeks later. Leadership seemed surprised. Tried to counteroffer. But it was too late. I'd already made my decision. Packed my desk quietly. No speeches. No dramatic exits. Just a few boxes. Couple of personal items. People stopped by to say goodbye. Wished me well. No one asked why I was leaving. Think they knew. On my last day, I walked out of the building with my head high and my conscience clear. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just felt peace. Because I'd proven something important. Not to him. Not to leadership. To myself. I knew my worth. And I refused to settle for anything less. I heard later that he was let go. Not because of me. Not directly. But because once the truth came out, leadership started asking questions. They reviewed his other projects. Looked at his claims. Cross-checked his results. And they found the same pattern. Taking credit. Inflating contributions. Relying on other people's work. It wasn't just me. It was a system. And systems like that eventually collapse. He confused credit with competence. And those two things always diverge eventually. Competence can be hidden for a while. But not forever. The truth has a way of surfacing when it matters most. I didn't feel vindicated when I heard. I just felt sad. Sad that it had taken so long. Sad that it had required a client to speak up. Sad that doing good work hadn't been enough on its own. But also grateful. Because I'd learned something I'd carry with me forever. Your value doesn't come from other people's recognition. Comes from knowing what you've built. And refusing to let anyone else define it. I started my new role 3 weeks later. Team welcomed me. Valued me. Give me the title and the authority that matched what I actually did. I didn't win by yelling. I didn't win by making scenes or burning bridges. I won by knowing my worth. By documenting the truth. By staying calm and letting my work speak when it mattered most. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, strategic, patient. Sometimes it's just walking away while everything you built finally gets the recognition it deserved. And sometimes the best victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's proving yourself right. I built something real. Something valuable. And no one, no matter how loud or confident, could take that away from me. The truth didn't need me to shout it. It just needed me to stand firm while everything else fell into place. And that's exactly what I did.